The little boy couldn't have been more than 4, standing alone on the tree-lined pathway through the city park, his small body trembling with sobs that no one seemed to notice. Designer clothes, a tiny blue suit that probably cost more than my monthly rent, marked him as someone from a world I'd never touched. But wealth didn't stop the morning joggers and coffee-carrying professionals from streaming past him like water around a stone. I'd never been good at looking away. "Hey, sweetheart." I knelt beside him, keeping my voice gentle despite my racing heart. "Are you lost?" He looked at me with red-rimmed blue eyes and said something I didn't understand. "Not English." I tried Spanish. I'd worked with enough multilingual families at the community center to manage basic phrases. His crying only intensified. Then French, hoping maybe his family was European tourists. Nothing. The boy's panic was escalating, and I was running out of options. Then, almost instinctively, I reached back to my college years when I'd taken Russian language courses, fascinated by the literature and culture. The words felt rusty on my tongue, but I tried anyway. "Niplash, Malish," I murmured softly. "Don't cry, little one. Ya pomagu tebi. I'm here to help." His reaction was instant and startling. He went completely still, his tear-filled eyes widening with recognition and desperate relief. Then he threw himself into my arms, small hands clutching at my jacket as he whispered rapid Russian words I could barely catch. Before I could process what was happening, I noticed them. 6 men in dark suits moving through the park with military precision, clearly searching. They weren't security guards or police. Something about their synchronized movements, the way other pedestrians unconsciously gave them space, the bulges beneath their jackets that suggested weapons, sent a chill down my spine. The boy saw them too. "Papa!" he cried, pointing. One of the men spotted us, and his entire demeanor shifted. He spoke rapidly into an earpiece, and suddenly all 6 converged on our location with frightening speed. They formed a protective circle around us, and I instinctively pulled the boy closer, my social worker training screaming warnings my conscious mind hadn't fully processed yet. "David," the nearest man said, his voice gentle despite his intimidating appearance. He knelt down, checking the boy over with practiced efficiency before his sharp eyes found mine. "You found him. Thank you." His English was perfect, but his accent was distinctly Italian. "He was upset and alone," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Chi, è questa donna?" The voice cut through the morning air like a blade, commanding, cold, carrying the kind of authority that made people obey without question. "Who is this woman?" I turned toward the voice and felt my breath catch. The Mafia boss walking toward us was the kind of dangerous that went beyond physical threat. Tall, powerfully built, moving through the space like he owned not just the park, but the entire city. Dark hair, sharp features, olive skin marked with tattoos that crept up from his collar and wound down to his hands. Hands that looked like they'd built empires and destroyed enemies. He wore a dark suit that probably cost more than my car, an expensive watch glinting at his wrist. But it was his eyes that held me frozen. Dark, intense, calculating. Eyes that were currently locked on me with a focus that made every survival instinct I had scream danger. This wasn't just a father looking for his lost son. This was the Mafia boss. Someone powerful, someone feared, someone you didn't cross. And he was looking at me like he was deciding whether I was a threat. "Papa!" David released my hand and ran to him, and I watched the Mafia boss's entire expression transform. He scooped up his son with surprising gentleness, the cold mask cracking to reveal genuine relief and love. "Dorogoy," he murmured in Russian, his voice suddenly soft. "My dear one, Ti menya napugal." "You scared me." They spoke rapidly in Russian, David explaining, The mafia boss gently scolding but clearly just grateful. I caught enough to understand the basics. The boy had seen a dog, chased it, gotten lost. Then the mafia boss's eyes found mine again over David's dark head. You speak Russian. It wasn't a question, and his English was flawless, though heavily accented. Something in his tone made it clear he found this significant. Suspicious, even. Some, I said carefully, suddenly very aware of the armed men surrounding us. I studied it in college. I work with multilingual children, so. Your name? Again, not a question. A command delivered so smoothly I almost didn't notice I was being interrogated. Naomi. Naomi Smith. The mafia boss studied me for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he set David down carefully, keeping one hand on his son's shoulder, and took a step closer. The movement was deliberate, controlled, and I had to resist the urge to step back. Carlo Bernardo. He extended his other hand. You found my son. I'm grateful. I shook his hand, feeling the strength in his grip, the calluses that suggested violence despite the expensive suit. Prego, I said quietly. You're welcome. I'm just glad he's safe. Bernardo, not Russian. The mafia boss's dark eyes traced my features with unsettling intensity. Yet you speak it fluently enough to calm a traumatized child. Where did you learn? There was something beneath the question. Suspicion, curiosity, or calculation. Maybe all three. Like I said, college courses. Then I kept practicing because I work with immigrant families. Kids respond better when you can speak their language. Why was I nervous? He was just a grateful father. Except everything about this situation, the guards, the intensity, the way the mafia boss was looking at me, said otherwise. The mafia boss said something in Russian to David. Thank the kind lady who found you. And the boy turned to me with solemn blue eyes. Spasibo, Naomi, he said softly, then surprised me by hugging my legs. Ti dobraya. You're kind. My heart melted despite my unease. You're welcome, sweetheart. When I looked up, the mafia boss was watching me with an expression that made my skin prickle, intense, focused, like he was memorizing every detail of my face, like I was a puzzle he intended to solve. I should go, I said abruptly, taking a step back. I'm on my lunch break and I need to get back to work. Where do you work? The mafia boss's question came too quickly, too sharp. A community center near here. I really should. Wait. But I was already moving, disappearing into the crowd of morning walkers and joggers, my heart pounding for reasons I didn't want to examine. Something about the mafia boss had set off every warning bell in my head, despite the grateful father act. I made it 3 blocks before I realized something. He'd never told me his son's name was David. David had said it in Russian, and the mafia boss had only called him terms of endearment. Which meant the mafia boss knew I'd understood more of their conversation than I'd let on. Which meant he knew I'd been paying very close attention. I glanced over my shoulder, half expecting to see the mafia boss following, but the crowded street showed only strangers. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted in that moment in the park. That by speaking Russian to a crying child, I'd stepped into something far bigger and more dangerous than a simple good deed. I had no idea how right I was. I made it back to the community center with 15 minutes left of my lunch break, my hands still shaking slightly as I swiped my badge at the front entrance. The familiar smell of industrial cleaner and the sound of children's laughter from the after-school program should have grounded me, reminded me I was back in my world, safe, normal, predictable. Instead, all I could see were those dark, calculating eyes. The mafia boss's stare had burned itself into my memory like a brand. Naomi, there you are! Maria, the receptionist, waved me over with unusual excitement. Someone dropped off a package for you about 20 minutes ago. My stomach dropped. A package? Yeah. Fancy courier and everything. It's at your desk. I walked to my small office in the back, my pulse hammering. Sitting on my desk was an elegant black box with a silver ribbon, the kind of packaging that screamed expensive. No return address, no card visible. With trembling fingers, I opened it. Inside was a children's book, a beautiful Russian fairy tale edition with gilt edges and illustrated pages. Tucked inside the front cover was a cream-colored card with 2 words written in elegant script: "Thank you." No signature, none needed. How did the Mafia boss know where I worked? I'd only said a community center near here. There were at least 6 within a mile radius of that park. I grabbed my phone, then stopped. Who was I going to call? The police? And tell them what? That a grateful father sent me a thank you gift? Except he wasn't just a grateful father. He was the Mafia boss. And somehow, in the 2 hours since I'd left that park, he'd found out exactly where I worked. I shoved the book into my desk drawer and tried to focus on my afternoon appointments. 3 intake interviews, 2 home visit follow-ups, endless paperwork. But I couldn't concentrate. My eyes kept drifting to the window overlooking the street. That's when I saw it. A black SUV with tinted windows idling across the street. It had been there when I arrived back from lunch, and it was still there now. Same spot. Engine running. I told myself it was nothing. People parked on streets. SUVs were common. This was New York. Half the vehicles on the road were black SUVs, but I couldn't shake the feeling that someone inside was watching me. By 5 o'clock, I'd convinced myself I was being paranoid. The book was just a kind gesture. The SUV was a coincidence. The Mafia boss had more important things to do than keep track of one random social worker who'd helped his lost son. I left through the front entrance, pulling my jacket tight against the evening chill, and headed for the subway station 3 blocks away. The black SUV pulled away from the curb and followed. My heart kicked into overdrive. I walked faster, weaving through the rush-hour pedestrians, telling myself I was imagining things. But when I glanced back, the SUV was still there, crawling along at walking pace. Then I noticed the man. Tall, dark suit, walking about 20 feet behind me. When I slowed, he slowed. When I sped up, so did he. I ducked into a bodega, pretending to browse the shelves while watching the door. The man walked past, but I saw him stop just beyond the window, checking his phone. Waiting. "You okay, miss?" The clerk looked concerned. "Fine," I lied, grabbing a bottle of water I didn't want and paying cash with shaking hands. When I emerged, the man was gone. So was the SUV. See? Paranoid. Just paranoid. I made it to the subway, squeezed onto a packed train, and tried to breathe normally. 40 minutes later, I climbed the stairs to street level near my apartment in Queens, finally allowing myself to relax. My phone rang. Unknown number. I hesitated, then answered. "Hello?" Silence. Then a click. Wrong number. Had to be. It rang again 10 minutes later. Same thing. Silence. Then disconnect. And again as I climbed the stairs to my 3rd-floor apartment. By the time I locked my door behind me, my nerves were completely fried. I made tea with hands that wouldn't stop trembling, then stood at my kitchen window, looking down at the street below. My breath caught. The black SUV was parked directly across from my building. This wasn't paranoia. This wasn't coincidence. The Mafia boss was having me followed. Anger flared through my fear, white-hot and sudden. I'd helped his son. I'd been kind to a scared child. And this was how he repaid me? By stalking me? By invading my privacy? Before I could second-guess myself, I grabbed my keys and stormed back downstairs. The street was quiet. Most of my neighbors already inside for the evening. The SUV sat under a streetlight, engine running, tinted windows revealing nothing. I marched up to the driver's side and knocked hard on the window. Nothing. I knocked again. Harder. I know you're in there. I know you've been following me. The window rolled down slowly, revealing the same man from earlier, the one who'd followed me to the subway. Up close, I could see the earpiece, the shoulder holster barely concealed under his suit jacket. Miss Smith? His voice was calm, professional, not threatening, but not apologetic either. Why are you following me? I demanded, trying to keep my voice steady despite my racing heart. I helped a lost child. That doesn't give you, or him, the right to stalk me. Not stalking, the man corrected mildly. Protecting. Protecting? From what? It's for your safety, Miss Smith. I don't need protection. I need to be left alone. Something shifted in his expression, almost sympathy. I understand this is unsettling, but my orders are clear, and Mr. Bernardo's orders are not negotiable. The way he said the Mafia boss's name, with a deference that bordered on fear, sent ice down my spine. So what? He just gets to decide I need protection? He gets to track my every move? You spoke Russian to his son, the man said quietly. In his world, Miss Smith, that makes you interesting, and interesting people need to be understood, protected, or eliminated. The last word hung in the air between us like a blade. Are you threatening me? No. He actually looked offended. I'm explaining reality. You've caught the boss's attention. That's not something you can undo. So the question isn't whether we watch you, it's whether you cooperate or make things difficult. And if I call the police? A slight smile. The police won't help you, Miss Smith. Trust me on that. I stepped back, my anger draining into cold realization. This wasn't just about a grateful father. The Mafia boss had decided I was... what? A person of interest? A potential threat? A puzzle to solve? How long? I asked quietly. How long what? How long do I have to live like this? With you people watching me? The man's expression was almost kind. Until the boss decides he understands who you are. Could be days. Could be weeks. And then? Then he'll decide what to do with you. The way he said it made my blood run cold. I turned and walked back to my building, forcing myself not to run, feeling the weight of his eyes on my back with every step. Inside my apartment, I locked the door, threw the deadbolt, and stood in the middle of my living room, trying to process what had just happened. The Mafia boss, Carlo Bernardo, hadn't forgotten me. He was watching me, studying me, tracking my every movement. And I had no idea why a man that powerful, that dangerous, would care about one ordinary social worker who'd simply been kind to his son. But as I looked down at the black SUV still parked outside my window, one thing became terrifyingly clear. Whatever I'd stepped into that morning in the park, there was no stepping back out. The Mafia boss had decided I mattered, and in his world, that might be the most dangerous thing of all. The text came at 6:47 a.m., jolting me awake from a restless sleep I'd only fallen into an hour before. You will meet me tomorrow morning. We need to talk about David. No signature, no explanation, no question mark. Because it wasn't a request. I stared at the unknown number, my heart already racing. I didn't need a signature to know who'd sent it. There was only one person who would summon me like this, with the casual arrogance of someone who expected immediate obedience. The Mafia boss. A second text followed. 8 a.m. A car will collect you. I typed back with shaking fingers. Who is this? The response was immediate. You know who this is. I did. God help me. I did. I tried calling in sick to work, but Maria cheerfully reminded me I had no appointments until noon. I tried convincing myself I could just ignore the summons, stay locked in my apartment, pretend I'd never received the messages. But the black SUV was still parked outside my building, and deep down, I knew the Mafia boss wasn't someone you ignored. At 7:55 a.m., I stood on the sidewalk in my most professional outfit, gray slacks, a navy blouse, minimal makeup, trying to look calm and collected when inside I was screaming. At exactly 8 a.m., the black SUV pulled up. The same man from last night emerged from the driver's side, opening the back door with mechanical efficiency. "Miss Smith." "I can still say no," I said, hating how my voice shook. "You can." His expression suggested I wouldn't like the consequences. "But Mr. Bernardo doesn't appreciate having his time wasted." I climbed in. The interior smelled like leather and expensive cologne. Another man sat in the passenger seat, both of them silent as we pulled into traffic. No one spoke. No one even looked at me. The silence was oppressive, deliberate, designed to unsettle. It worked. We drove out of Queens, across the bridge, through Manhattan and into an area of Westchester I'd only seen in magazines. Estates hidden behind stone walls and iron gates, the kind of wealth that didn't advertise itself but didn't need to. The SUV turned onto a private road, stopping at a gate that wouldn't have looked out of place at a military installation. Cameras, guards. The gate rolled open soundlessly. My stomach twisted tighter with each passing second. The mansion that came into view was something out of a movie. All stone and glass and manicured gardens, sprawling across acres of pristine property. Fountains, sculptures, armed men in suits positioned at intervals like deadly lawn ornaments. This was the Mafia boss's home, and I was being delivered to him like a package. Inside, the mansion was even more intimidating. Marble floors, soaring ceilings, artwork that probably cost more than my entire year's salary. A woman in a crisp uniform. Housekeeper? Assistant? Led me through hallways that seemed designed to make visitors feel small. We stopped at a set of double doors. She knocked once, then opened them without waiting for a response. "Miss Smith, sir?" The study was all dark wood and leather, floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, and windows overlooking the gardens. And standing by those windows, backlit by morning sun, was the Mafia boss. He looked different in his own territory, more relaxed, yet somehow more dangerous. Charcoal suit, no tie, top button undone. The tattoos on his neck were more visible in the natural light. He held a crystal tumbler with amber liquid, though it wasn't even 9 in the morning. "Miss Smith." He turned, those dark eyes finding mine immediately. "Sit." Not a request. Never a request with him. I sat in one of the leather chairs facing his massive desk, trying to keep my spine straight, my expression neutral. The Mafia boss moved to his desk but didn't sit. Instead, he perched on the edge, studying me like I was a specimen under glass. "Russian," he said finally. "Tell me how you learned it." "I already told you." "Tell me again." His voice was soft, but there was steel underneath. "In detail. Where? When? Why?" I swallowed hard. "Columbia. I took language courses as electives. Russian literature fascinated me. Tolstoy, Dostoevsky, Pushkin. I wanted to read them in the original language." "And you continued studying after graduation?" "Yes. I found a tutor through the community center. Once a week for 2 years." "Why?" The Mafia boss took a sip of his drink, never taking his eyes off me. "Most Americans can barely speak English properly. Why dedicate years to learning Russian?" "Because I work with immigrant families," I said, forcing steadiness into my voice. "Children who've experienced trauma. Language is the first barrier to trust. If I can speak even a little of their native language, it opens doors." "Convenient." His tone suggested he didn't believe in convenience. "It's not convenient, it's intentional. It's my job. Your job." The Mafia boss set down his glass with a sharp click. "And yesterday, was that your job? Comforting my son?" "Yesterday was human decency. Your son was terrified and alone." My son hasn't spoken, truly spoken, since his mother died 8 months ago. The Mafia boss's expression remained cold, but something flickered in his eyes. Pain, maybe, or rage. The best child psychologists in the country have tried, specialists, therapists. Nothing. He screams, he cries, but he doesn't communicate. He moved closer, and I had to force myself not to lean back. Then you appear, a stranger. You whisper Russian, and suddenly my son is calm, talking, clinging to you like you're his salvation. His voice dropped to something dangerous. So forgive me, Miss Smith, if I don't believe in coincidences. What are you suggesting? Anger cut through my fear. That I somehow orchestrated finding your lost son? That I stalked a 4-year-old through Central Park hoping to, what? Get your attention? People have done worse to get close to me. I don't want to be close to you. The words burst out before I could stop them. I want to go back to my normal life, where I'm not being followed and threatened and summoned like some... You weren't threatened. Your man told me you'd decide what to do with me. Silence. The Mafia boss's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Marco will be reprimanded for his poor choice of words. He stepped back, putting distance between us. You're not in danger, Miss Smith. But I need to understand who you are. What you want. I don't want anything, I said tiredly. I just want to be left alone. Too late for that. The Mafia boss returned to his desk, pulling out a folder. Your background check came back clean. Too clean, actually. No criminal record. No suspicious associations. No debts. Just a dedicated social worker who lives quietly and apparently speaks 4 languages. You investigated me. It wasn't a question. Of course I did. He said it like it was obvious. And what I found is someone who specializes in childhood trauma, specifically, children who've lost parents violently. My breath caught. How did you? I'm thorough. The Mafia boss leaned forward, elbows on his desk. David's mother was murdered. He saw things no child should see. And now he won't talk to anyone except you. The weight of what he was saying settled over me. I need your help, the Mafia boss said, and for the first time I heard something other than command in his voice, something almost vulnerable. Professionally, I need you to work with David. I'm not a therapist. You're exactly what he needs. Someone who understands trauma, who speaks his language, literally. He paused. I'm prepared to pay you very well. This isn't about money. Everything is about money, Miss Smith. But his eyes suggested he didn't quite believe that either. What would it take for you to help my son? I looked at him. Really looked at him. Saw past the expensive suit and the dangerous reputation to the father underneath. The man who'd held his son with such desperate gentleness yesterday. 1 session, I heard myself say. Let me meet with David once more, talk to him, see if I can actually help. Then we'll discuss what comes next. The Mafia boss's expression shifted. Barely, but enough. His eyes softened for just a fraction of a second, and that glimpse of humanity frightened me more than all his cold authority, because it made him real. It made him someone I could care about. And that was the most dangerous thing of all. Agreed. He said quietly, David is upstairs. I'll take you to him. As the Mafia boss stood and moved toward the door, I realized I'd just agreed to step deeper into his world. And something told me there would be no stepping back out. The Mafia boss led me through his mansion in silence, our footsteps echoing on marble floors. We passed more armed guards, more priceless artwork, more evidence of a wealth and power I couldn't begin to comprehend. Every door we walked through felt like crossing another threshold into his world, a world I wasn't sure I'd be able to leave. We climbed a grand staircase to the 2nd floor, where the decor shifted. The intimidating opulence gave way to something softer. Cream-colored walls, framed children's drawings, a small table with toy cars scattered across its surface. David's floor. The playroom is at the end of the hall, the Mafia boss said, his voice lower now, almost careful. His nanny, Margaret, is with him. She's been with our family for 3 years. She's struggling with his silence as much as anyone. Our family? The words hung in the air, a reminder that David had a mother once, that this dangerous man beside me had loved someone enough to build a family with her. We stopped outside a set of white double doors. Through the gap, I could hear the quiet murmur of a woman's voice, gentle and coaxing, met only with silence. The Mafia boss's jaw tightened. He used to laugh constantly, chatter in Russian and Italian about everything and nothing. Now, he trailed off, then seemed to catch himself, his expression hardening back into that cold mask. Margaret, step outside, please. The door opened, revealing a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and tired lines around her mouth. She looked at me with open curiosity, then at the Mafia boss with something like hope. Sir? This is Miss Smith. She'll be spending time with David. Give us privacy. Margaret nodded and slipped past us, but not before I caught her whispered, Good luck. The Mafia boss gestured for me to enter first, then followed, positioning himself near the doorway, close enough to watch, far enough to give space. The playroom was beautiful. Soft lighting, educational toys arranged on low shelves, a reading nook with cushions, and in the center, sitting on a plush rug surrounded by untouched puzzles, was David. He looked smaller than I remembered, more fragile in his casual clothes, a blue sweater and tiny jeans. His dark hair was slightly messy, and he was staring at a picture book without really seeing it. My heart cracked. David? I said softly in Russian, kneeling on the edge of the rug. Privyet, malaish. Hello, little one. His head snapped up so fast I heard the Mafia boss take a sharp breath behind me. David's blue eyes, so much like his father's, went wide. For a long moment he just stared at me, like he wasn't sure I was real. Then his lower lip started trembling. Naomi? His voice was barely a whisper, hoarse from disuse. Da, eto ya. Yes, it's me. He moved then, exploded into motion, launching himself across the rug and into my arms with such force we both nearly toppled over. His small hands clutched at my blouse, his face buried in my shoulder, and he was talking. Rapid, desperate Russian pouring out of him like a dam had broken. Ti prishla nazad, ya dumal ti ushla navsegda kak mama, ona ushla I ne vernulas. You came back. You came back. I thought you left forever like Mama. She left and didn't come back. Shmalyash, yazdes. Shh, little one, I'm here. I held him, rocking slightly, murmuring reassurances in Russian while tears burned behind my eyes. This poor child. This traumatized, grieving little boy who'd been locked in silence because he'd lost the one person who spoke his heart language. Behind me, I heard something that sounded like a sharp exhale, almost a gasp. I glanced back to see the Mafia boss standing frozen in the doorway, one hand gripping the doorframe so tightly his knuckles had gone white. His face was a study in controlled devastation, jaw clenched, eyes bright with unshed tears, that cold mask shattered completely. He was watching his son speak for the first time in 8 months. And the grief in his expression was so raw, so human, that I had to look away. Movement at the door. Margaret had returned, drawn by David's voice. She stood behind the Mafia boss, one hand over her mouth, tears streaming freely down her face. Another woman appeared, younger, in a crisp professional suit, probably one of the specialists. She looked utterly stunned. David pulled back slightly, his tear-stained face tilted up to mine. Ti budeš ostavat? Will you stay? I looked at the Mafia boss helplessly. He'd composed himself, wiped away whatever emotion had broken through, but his eyes were still locked on his son with an intensity that made my chest ache. David, he said gently in Russian, moving closer. Naomi prishla nas nevestit. Naomi came to visit us. Net. David's grip on me tightened. Ona dolzna ostatya, ona govorit kak mama. Ona ponimayet. No, she has to stay. She speaks like mama. She understands. The Mafia boss knelt beside us, and I saw his hand tremble slightly before he reached out to stroke his son's hair. Yaznayu, sin. Yaznayu. I know, son. I know. Father and son looked at each other, and something passed between them. A shared grief, a shared desperate need. Then the Mafia boss's eyes found mine over David's head. Miss Smith, may I speak with you privately? 5 minutes later, we stood in the hallway while Margaret stayed with David, who'd finally released me, but only after I'd promised, in Russian, that I'd come back. The Mafia boss stood with his back to me, one hand pressed against the wall, his breathing carefully controlled. When he finally turned, his composure was mostly restored, but I could still see the cracks. 8 months, he said quietly. 8 months of silence, the best specialists money can buy. Therapists, psychiatrists, trauma experts. Nothing worked. And you? He stopped, shook his head. 2 minutes, 2 minutes, and he's talking. It's the language, I said, my own voice unsteady. Russian was his connection to his mother. Losing her, he lost that too. He probably associated speaking with loss, with pain. I know why. The Mafia boss cut me off, but not harshly. Margaret speaks Russian. So do 2 of my staff. He wouldn't talk to any of them. Then it's not just the language, it's... I struggled to find words. Sometimes children who've experienced trauma attach to specific people. I don't know why he chose me. I do. The Mafia boss stepped closer. You showed him kindness when he was terrified. You stayed calm when he was panicking. You were safe. His voice dropped. You reminded him that safe people still exist. The weight of that statement settled over us both. I need you to work with David, the Mafia boss said. And despite the words being identical to what he'd said in his study, they sounded different now. Less command, more plea. Not occasionally, regularly. I'll pay you triple your current salary. You set the hours. You maintain your other job if you want. Whatever you need. It's not about money. I know it's not. He moved closer still, and I could smell his cologne, see the faint scar along his jawline. But I'm offering it anyway, because my son needs you. And I'll do whatever it takes to give him what he needs. The intensity in his eyes pinned me in place. This wasn't the cold, calculating Mafia boss from the study. This was a desperate father who'd just watched his child speak for the first time in months. Your world, I said carefully. The guards, the surveillance, the danger you clearly live with, won't touch you, he interrupted. I give you my word. You'll be under my protection. No one will harm you. No one will even approach you without my explicit permission. And if I say no? Something flickered in his expression. Then I'll let you walk away. David will slip back into silence, and I'll have to live knowing I could have helped him, but let my pride stand in the way. It was manipulation. Subtle. Effective. But it was also true. I thought about David's desperate grip, his tear-stained face, the way he'd said mama like a prayer and a curse. 1 month, I heard myself say. Trial basis. 3 sessions a week. I maintain my other job. And the moment I feel unsafe, you leave. No questions asked. The Mafia boss extended his hand. I hesitated, knowing that shaking it would change everything. that I'd be stepping fully into his world, binding myself to him and his son in ways I couldn't yet understand. But then I remembered David's blue eyes. So much trust, so much hope. I shook his hand. The mafia boss's grip was firm, warm, and when he smiled, a small, genuine expression that transformed his entire face. I felt something shift in my chest, something dangerous, something that felt terrifyingly like the beginning of something I couldn't control. "Thank you, Miss Smith," he said softly. "You've just given my son something I thought he'd lost forever." As we walked back toward the playroom, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd given the mafia boss something too: access. And men like him never let go of what they claimed. 3 weeks into my arrangement with the mafia boss, and David was a different child. Not completely healed. Trauma didn't work that way, but lighter. He smiled now. Small, tentative things that appeared when I read him Russian fairy tales or when we built elaborate block towers together. He spoke in full sentences, mixing Russian and Italian depending on his mood, his little voice growing stronger each day. And through it all, the mafia boss watched. Not obviously, not intrusively, but I felt his presence like a physical weight. In the doorway during our sessions, at the end of the hallway when I arrived, in the study with the door cracked open as I walked David to the gardens, always watching. "Naomi? Smotri?" David tugged on my sleeve, pulling me toward the playroom window. "Look!" "Sneg!" "Snow." I knelt beside him, watching the first flakes of December drift past the glass. Beautiful, isn't it? Cresivo. "Mama, Ljubila, Sneg." Mama loved snow. My chest tightened. This was progress. David talking about his mother without dissolving into tears. "Tell me about her. Raskazi mne one." He did, in soft Russian, describing how she'd make hot chocolate and take him sledding, how she'd catch snowflakes on her tongue and laugh. I listened, murmuring encouragement, watching his face animate with bittersweet memory. I didn't notice the mafia boss in the doorway until David looked up and said, "Papa, Naomi slushayet o mame." "Papa." Naomi is listening about Mama. The mafia boss entered the playroom with that particular controlled grace that seemed innate to him. Today he wore dark slacks and a black sweater that somehow made him look both more casual and more dangerous. "Eto korosho sin." "That's good, son." His eyes found mine over David's head. "Talking about her helps." "It does," I agreed quietly. The mafia boss settled into one of the low chairs, looking absurdly out of place on the child-sized furniture but doing it anyway. He listened as David continued his story, occasionally adding details in Russian, his voice softer than I'd ever heard it. This was becoming routine, the mafia boss finding reasons to be present during my sessions. Never intrusive, never interfering, just there, watching me, watching his son, watching us together. "Miss Smith, a moment?" I'd just finished my session, walking David to Margaret for lunch, when the mafia boss appeared in the hallway. He did that, materialized without warning, like he knew exactly where I'd be at any given moment. Which, given the security cameras everywhere, he probably did. Of course. He gestured toward his study, and I followed, acutely aware of how the staff melted away as we passed. The housekeeper who'd been arranging flowers suddenly found urgent business elsewhere. 2 guards in the hallway stepped back, eyes averted, deferential in a way that went beyond professional respect. They feared him, not in a cowering way, but in the way subjects feared kings, respectful, wary, absolute in their obedience. Inside his study, the mafia boss closed the door and moved to the bar cart. "Drink? It's 1 in the afternoon." "That's not a no." A hint of amusement in his voice. "Water is fine." He poured himself something amber, then brought me sparkling water in a crystal glass. Our fingers brushed during the exchange, and I pulled back too quickly. The Mafia boss noticed. He noticed everything. David's progress is remarkable, he said, settling against his desk in that way he had. Casual, but commanding. Margaret says he's sleeping better. Eating more. She heard him laugh yesterday. He's resilient. Children are. Because of you. Because he's ready to heal. I'm just providing a safe space for it. The Mafia boss studied me over his glass. You deflect compliments. I state facts. Do you? He took a sip, his dark eyes never leaving mine. Tell me something, Miss Smith. Why social work? You're clearly intelligent. You speak multiple languages. You could work anywhere, make more money, have less heartbreak. Why dedicate your life to other people's trauma? The question felt too personal, too probing. Why does anyone choose their career? Most people choose careers for money, status, or family legacy. He set down his glass. You chose one that pays poorly and breaks your heart daily. I want to know why. Does it matter? To me? Yes. He moved closer, and I forced myself not to step back. Everything about you matters, Miss Smith, because you matter to my son, and what matters to him matters to me. The intensity in his voice made my pulse quicken. This felt like more than curiosity about David's therapist. This felt personal in a way that set off warning bells in my head. My mother, I said finally, hating how my voice wavered. She was an immigrant, came to America alone, struggled with the language, with the culture. When she got sick, the system failed her because she couldn't navigate it. She died waiting for treatment she should have received. The Mafia boss's expression shifted. Something like understanding, maybe even empathy. I was 15, I continued, and I decided no one else should fall through the cracks like she did. So I learned languages. I learned systems. I learned how to help people who couldn't help themselves. Silence stretched between us, heavy with things unsaid. Your mother would be proud, the Mafia boss said quietly. I hope so. He looked like he wanted to say more, but David's laughter echoed from somewhere upstairs, breaking the moment. The Mafia boss's expression softened automatically at the sound, a father's involuntary response to his child's joy. I should go, I said. I have appointments at the center this afternoon. Marco will drive you. I can take the train. Marco will drive you, he repeated, firmer this time. And he'll wait to bring you back for tomorrow's session. That's not necessary. It is to me. The Mafia boss moved to his desk, effectively dismissing the argument. You're under my protection, Miss Smith. That means my men ensure your safety. Non-negotiable. I wanted to argue, to assert my independence, but the look on his face told me it would be pointless. The Mafia boss had decided I needed protection, and what he decided became reality. Fine, I said, heading for the door. Naomi. I froze. He'd never used my first name before. Always Miss Smith, formal and distant. I turned back. The Mafia boss stood backlit by the window, powerful and dangerous and somehow vulnerable all at once. Thank you. For what you're doing for David. For what you're doing for us. Us. Not him. Not David. Us. Like we were becoming a unit. Like I was becoming part of something I'd never agreed to join. Over the following week, the Mafia boss's presence intensified. He walked me to the car every evening, his hand occasionally touching the small of my back, brief, burning contact that felt far too intimate. He appeared during my sessions more frequently, finding excuses to be nearby, needing a book from the playroom shelves, checking on David's schedule, asking about my methodology. His men began treating me differently too. Opening doors with murmured Miss Smiths, the chef asking my preferences for lunch, guards nodding respectfully as I passed. Like I was someone important. like I belonged to the Mafia boss's inner circle, and the man himself grew increasingly protective in ways that felt less professional and more possessive. When a delivery man came too close while I was in the garden with David, the Mafia boss appeared within seconds, his presence alone making the man back away nervously. When one of his associates visited and his eyes lingered on me too long, the Mafia boss's voice dropped to ice, and the man practically fled. "You didn't need to do that," I said after the associate left, my heart pounding from the barely contained violence I'd sensed. "Yes," the Mafia boss said simply. "I did." "Why?" He looked at me then, really looked at me, and something in his expression made my breath catch. "Because you're under my protection, and I protect what's mine." What's mine? Not who. What? Like I was a possession. Except the heat in his eyes suggested something far more complicated than ownership. That night, as Marco drove me home, I stared out at the city lights and tried to ignore the truth I'd been avoiding for 3 weeks. The Mafia boss wasn't just protective of me because of David. He was protective because he wanted me, and despite every logical reason I had to run, despite the danger and the darkness and the impossibility of it all, I was starting to want him too. God help me. I was falling into the Mafia boss's gravity, and I had no idea how to pull myself free, or if I even wanted to anymore. The flowers arrived on a Tuesday morning. Not at the mansion, at my apartment in Queens. 3 dozen white roses in a crystal vase that probably cost more than my monthly rent, sitting outside my door when I stumbled out for my morning coffee run. No card, no signature, just roses. White, pristine, and utterly inappropriate. I knew who sent them. Of course I knew. I carried them inside with shaking hands, set them on my kitchen counter, and stared at them like they might explode. They were beautiful. The kind of flawless beauty that came with money and power and the expectation of getting what you wanted. My phone buzzed. Unknown number. But I knew that too. "Do you like them?" I shouldn't respond. I should block the number, throw out the flowers, draw a clear line between my professional work with David and whatever this was becoming with his father. Instead, I typed, "They're lovely, also completely unnecessary." 3 dots appeared immediately, like he'd been waiting for my response. "Nothing about you is unnecessary, Naomi." My first name again. He'd been using it more frequently, letting it roll off his tongue in that accented voice that did things to my pulse I refused to acknowledge. "Mr. Bernardo." "Carlo." I stared at my phone, at those 5 letters that represented a line I absolutely should not cross. Calling him Carlo would make this personal, would acknowledge that something was shifting between us, something dangerous and inevitable, and completely insane. "Mr. Bernardo," I typed firmly, "we need to maintain professional boundaries." Is that what we're maintaining? The question felt loaded, heavy with implications I wasn't ready to examine. I didn't respond. Instead, I grabbed my bag and headed out, taking the train to the mansion because I'd told Marco I didn't need a ride today, trying to assert some small measure of independence in a situation that was rapidly spiraling beyond my control. The black SUV was waiting at the station anyway. "Miss Smith." Marco held the door open, his expression carefully neutral. "Boss said you'd take the train. Also said I should be here when you did." "Of course he did," I muttered, climbing in. Because Carlo Bernardo, the Mafia boss, didn't leave things to chance. He anticipated, planned, controlled every variable, including me, especially me. David was waiting in the playroom when I arrived, already bouncing with excitement about something. "Naomi, Naomi, Papa skazal my mochem poi TV park." "Naomi, Naomi, Papa said we can go to the park." I glanced at Margaret, who smiled. Mr. Bernardo thought fresh air would be good for David's sessions. There's a private area on the grounds with playground equipment. Not the public park where I'd found David. Somewhere safe, controlled, within the walls of Carlo's estate. That sounds wonderful, I said, taking David's hand. Poidem, Malyash. Let's go, little one. We walked through the gardens toward the Takom playground, David chattering in rapid Russian about the snow from last week, about a dream he'd had, about wanting hot chocolate later. Margaret followed at a discreet distance, giving us space but remaining present. The playground was beautiful. Expensive equipment that looked like it belonged at a high-end resort, surrounded by gardens that were probably maintained by a full-time staff. But David didn't care about the luxury. He just saw swings and slides and space to run. He was laughing, actually laughing, as I pushed him on the swing when I felt that familiar weight of being watched. Carlo stood at the edge of the playground, hands in his pockets, wearing dark jeans and a black jacket that somehow made him look both casual and dangerous. How long had he been there? Higher, Naomi! David squealed in Russian, and I obliged, pushing him higher while hyper-aware of Carlo's eyes on me. After several minutes, David scrambled off the swing and ran toward the elaborate climbing structure, Margaret trailing after him to spot, which left me standing alone at the swings, trying not to look at Carlo and failing miserably. He walked over slowly, deliberately, eating up the distance between us with that controlled grace. Thank you for the flowers, I said before he could speak. They were too much. Nothing is too much for you. He stopped close, too close, near enough that I could smell his cologne, see the faint stubble along his jaw. You like white roses? I never said that. You didn't throw them away. He had a point. David's doing well, I said, desperate to redirect this conversation to safe territory. His vocabulary is expanding, he's engaging more. I'm not here to talk about David. Carlo's voice dropped lower, intimate in a way that made my skin prickle. I'm here to talk about us. There is no us. I work with your son. You're lying. He said it gently, but there was certainty underneath. To yourself, maybe. But you're lying. My heart hammered against my ribs. Mr. Bernardo. Carlo. He moved closer, and I stepped back instinctively, my back hitting the swing set pole, trapped. Say my name, Naomi. This is inappropriate. This, he said, gesturing between us, has been inevitable since the moment you spoke Russian to my son. Since the moment you looked at me in that park like you could see past the monster everyone else fears. I don't... My voice caught. I don't know what you want from me. Don't you? Carlo raised his hand slowly, telegraphing the movement, giving me time to pull away. When I didn't, his fingers brushed my cheek, feather light and burning. You're intelligent, Naomi? Too intelligent to pretend you don't feel this. I did feel it. God help me. I felt it every time he looked at me, every time his hand touched my back, every time he said my name like it was something precious. You're dangerous, I whispered. Yes. No denial, no deflection, just honest acknowledgement. You're a criminal. Yes. Still no apology in his voice. I should be terrified of you. Are you? His thumb traced along my jaw, and I couldn't stop the small shiver that ran through me. Terrified? I should be. Any rational person would be. But standing here with his hand on my face, his dark eyes searching mine, all I felt was heat and want, and the dizzying sense of falling. Sometimes, I admitted, but not for the reasons I should be. Something flashed in his expression. Triumph, maybe, or relief. What reasons, then? Because you make me want things I can't have. Because every time I'm near you, I forget all the very logical reasons this is insane. I forced myself to meet his eyes. Because I'm falling for you. And that might be the most dangerous thing of all. The confession hung between us, raw and honest and terrifying. Carlo's hand moved to cup the back of my neck, his grip firm but gentle. I've killed people, Naomi. I've built an empire on violence and fear. I'm everything you should run from. I know. But you're not running. No. God, I was an idiot. I'm not. He leaned in slowly, giving me every opportunity to pull away, to stop this before it started. His breath ghosted across my lips, and I felt my eyes flutter closed despite every screaming instinct telling me this was wrong. Papa! Naomi! Smote right! David's voice shattered the moment. Look! We jerked apart like guilty teenagers, Carlo's hand dropping from my neck as we both turned toward David, who was hanging upside down from the monkey bars, grinning widely. Ja wiju, but ostrogen! I called back, my voice embarrassingly unsteady. I see. Be careful. Margaret was watching us with barely concealed interest, and I felt heat flood my face. Carlo cleared his throat, stepping back to put distance between us. But the heat in his eyes remained, promising this conversation wasn't over. We should talk, he said quietly. Properly. Tonight. Have dinner with me. Carlo. Please. The word sounded foreign in his mouth, like he rarely used it. Just dinner. Just conversation. Let me show you I'm more than what you fear. I should say no. Should maintain those professional boundaries I'd insisted on. Should protect myself from the inevitable heartbreak of falling for a man who lived in darkness. But David was laughing on the playground, healthier and happier than he'd been in months. And Carlo was looking at me like I was something precious, something worth risking for. And I was so tired of being careful. One dinner, I heard myself say. Here, where David can interrupt if needed. Not a date, just conversation. Just conversation, Carlo agreed, but his smile suggested he knew it would be so much more than that. As he walked away to play with David, I stood by the swings and tried to process what I'd just agreed to. One dinner with the Mafia boss, with Carlo, with the man I was absolutely, catastrophically falling for, despite every reason I had to run. This was going to end badly. I knew it with the same certainty I knew my own name. But as I watched Carlo lift David onto his shoulders, both of them laughing, I couldn't bring myself to care. Some disasters were worth falling into, and the Mafia boss might just be mine. The dinner never happened. At least, not the civilized, carefully controlled conversation the Mafia boss had planned. Instead, at 11 p.m., long after I should have gone home, I found myself in his study with a glass of whiskey I hadn't asked for and didn't want, watching him pace like a caged animal. David had woken screaming. Not unusual. Nightmares plagued him still. But tonight was different. Tonight he'd screamed for his mother in Russian, then for me, his small voice rising in panic until I'd come running from the guest room where I'd been reading, waiting for our scheduled dinner. It took 20 minutes to calm him. 20 minutes of holding him while he sobbed against my shoulder, whispering in Russian about blood and shouting and Mama not waking up. Margaret had finally taken over, rocking him back to sleep, while the Mafia boss stood in the doorway looking like he'd been carved from stone. Then he'd taken my hand and led me downstairs without a word. Now I sat in the leather chair across from his desk, watching him wrestle with something I couldn't name, the silence heavy between us. Her name was Katya. His voice came rough, like the words were being dragged from somewhere deep. David's mother, my wife. I'd known there was a wife, known she was dead, but hearing him say her name made her real in a way she hadn't been before. The Mafia boss stopped pacing, braced his hands on his desk, his back to me. She was Russian, from Moscow. I met her during a business trip. She was translating for a partner. Beautiful, intelligent, completely unimpressed by me. A bitter laugh. I spent 3 months pursuing her. Another 6 convincing her to move to New York. We married a year later. I stayed silent, sensing he needed to tell this his own way. David was born 2 years after that. She insisted he learn Russian first, before English or Italian. Said she wanted him to carry her language in his heart. The mafia boss's shoulders tensed. She was right. He took to it immediately. They would spend hours speaking Russian together, their own private world. The whiskey glass felt heavy in my hand. I sat down carefully. 8 months ago, my enemies decided to send a message. The mafia boss's voice went flat, emotionless. The only way he could get through this, I realized. They couldn't get to me directly, so they went after her. At our home in the city. David was there. He saw. His voice cracked. Just once, but enough. He saw them hurt her. The mafia boss continued, each word precise and controlled. Heard her scream. She tried to protect him, hid him in a closet, told him in Russian to be silent, to be brave. Then, they killed her. Oh God. Oh God. My men arrived minutes later, found David in that closet, covered in his mother's blood, completely silent. He hasn't spoken Russian since that day, wouldn't speak at all. The language that connected him to his mother became the language of his trauma. Understanding crashed over me in sickening waves. David's desperate reaction to my Russian in the park, his clinging, the way he'd said, "You came back," like he'd been waiting for someone who spoke his mother's language to prove the world could be safe again. That's why he responded to me, I whispered. Not just the language, but a woman speaking Russian who didn't hurt him, who was kind. Yes. The mafia boss finally turned, and the devastation in his eyes stole my breath. You were safe. You were what he'd lost. Russian and gentle and alive. He moved around the desk, kneeling in front of my chair so our eyes were level. His hands gripped the armrests on either side of me, caging me in but not threatening. Desperate. When I saw you in that park, holding my son while he cried, speaking the language his mother died protecting him with. The mafia boss's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. You looked like salvation, like fate had sent me the one person who could reach him. Carlo. I don't trust easily, Naomi. My world doesn't allow it. Trust gets you killed, gets the people you love killed. His knuckles whitened against the leather. But I trust you. With my son. With his trauma. With everything. The weight of that confession pressed against my chest. I hired investigators before I let you near him again, he admitted. Watched you for weeks. Made sure you were exactly who you claimed to be. And you were. Just a good person trying to help broken children. I'm not sure if I should be flattered or disturbed by that. A ghost of a smile. Both. Probably. He leaned closer, and I could see the exhaustion in his face, the lines of grief and guilt that he hid so well behind his cold mask. That moment in the park, watching you comfort David. The mafia boss's voice roughened with emotion. I felt something I thought died with Katya. Hope. The possibility that my son could heal. That maybe I could too. My hand moved before I could stop it, reaching up to touch his face. He leaned into it like a man starving for gentleness. You're falling in love with me, I said quietly. It wasn't a question. I fell the moment you spoke Russian to my son. His eyes held mine, dark and honest and terrifying in their intensity. And you're falling too. That's what scares you. He was right. God, he was right. I was tangled in this, in David's healing, in the mafia boss's carefully hidden vulnerability, in the dangerous gravity of a world I'd never wanted to enter. I'd become essential to a traumatized child and irresistible to his father. I'd become the mafia boss's weakness. And in his world, weaknesses got people killed. I should leave, I whispered, but I didn't move my hand from his face. This is dangerous. For both of us. Then let it be dangerous. The Mafia boss turned his head, pressing a kiss to my palm. Let me be selfish enough to want you anyway. Carlo, stay tonight. Not for anything except this. Let me hold you. Let me prove I can be gentle with what matters. Every rational part of my brain screamed that this was insane, but sitting there with his face against my hand, his eyes pleading in a way I knew he'd never plead with anyone else, I realized something terrifying. I didn't want to be rational anymore. I wanted to fall. Just tonight, I said, and watched relief transform his face. The Mafia boss stood, pulling me with him, his arms coming around me like I was something precious he'd been waiting his whole life to hold. And maybe I was. Maybe we both were. Two broken people finding wholeness in the most dangerous place possible, in each other's arms. I woke to the sound of rain against the windows and the warmth of the Mafia boss's arm draped across my waist. We'd fallen asleep in his study, tangled together on the leather sofa that was far too small for his frame but somehow perfect for us. He'd held me through the night exactly as he'd promised, gentle, protective, asking nothing more than the simple intimacy of being close. Now, in the gray morning light, reality crashed back with brutal clarity. I'd crossed a line I could never uncross. I carefully extracted myself from his embrace, watching his face remain peaceful in sleep. Younger somehow, the hard edges softened. This was the man beneath the Mafia boss, the father, the grieving husband, the person only David and I were allowed to see. I grabbed my shoes and slipped out quietly, my heart hammering. By the time I made it to the main entrance, Marco was already there with the car, his expression carefully neutral. He didn't ask questions, didn't judge. Just opened the door and drove me home in silence. The next 3 days, I called in sick to my sessions with David. It was cowardly. I knew it was cowardly. But I needed distance, needed space to think without the Mafia boss's dark eyes watching me, without David's small hand in mine, without the dangerous pull of a life I'd never imagined wanting. My phone rang constantly. Texts appeared like clockwork. David is asking for you. Please call. Naomi, talk to me. I ignored them all. On the 4th day, Maria from the community center knocked on my apartment door, worry etched into her face. Naomi, honey, there's a man downstairs asking for you. Says his name is Marco. He looks intimidating. My stomach dropped. Tell him I'm not home. I did. He said he'll wait. Of course he would. The Mafia boss didn't accept defeat, didn't accept rejection. When he wanted something, he took it. When he wanted someone, I grabbed my jacket. I'll handle it. Marco stood by the black SUV, rain dripping off his umbrella, his expression apologetic. Miss Smith, the boss needs to see you. I'm not going. David needs to see you. That stopped me cold. How is he? Not speaking again, won't eat. Margaret's worried. Marco's voice softened. He thinks you left like his mother did, that you're not coming back. The guilt hit like a physical blow. I'd been so focused on protecting myself that I'd forgotten what my absence would mean to a traumatized 4-year-old who'd already lost too much. 10 minutes, I said, climbing into the SUV. I'll explain to David that I need to leave, but I'll do it properly. Not like this. Marco's expression suggested he knew it wouldn't be that simple. He was right. The mansion felt different when I walked in. Quieter, heavier, like the building itself was holding its breath. Margaret met me in the foyer, her eyes red-rimmed. He's in his room. Won't come out. The boss has been... She trailed off, shaking her head. Just go to him, dear. Please. I climbed the stairs with leaden feet, every step feeling like a march toward inevitable heartbreak. David's door was open. The Mafia boss sat on the floor outside it, his back against the wall, still in yesterday's clothes, looking more exhausted than I'd ever seen him. When he saw me, Something flickered in his eyes. Relief, pain, anger, hope, all at once. He won't talk to me, the Mafia boss said quietly. Only asks for you in Russian. Over and over. I knelt beside him. Carlo, I can't. I know. His voice was rough, resigned. I know what you're going to say. That this is too much. Too dangerous. That you need to protect yourself. He finally looked at me, and the raw emotion in his face made my chest ache. And you're right. You should go. You should run as far from me as possible. Then why did you send Marco? For David. Not for me. The Mafia boss's jaw tightened. He needs to hear you say goodbye properly. Needs to understand you're choosing to leave, not abandoning him. He needs closure. The fact that he was putting his son's needs above his own wants made everything harder. And what about you? I whispered. What about me? A bitter smile. I'm the Mafia boss, Naomi. I don't get happy endings. I knew that when I married Katya. Knew it when she died. Knew it the moment I started falling for you. He stood, offered me his hand to help me up. When I took it, he held on for just a moment too long. If you leave, I will let you go, he said, his voice steady despite the devastation in his eyes. I won't follow, won't call, won't send flowers or guards or any reminder of what we could have been. But you need to know something. What? You'll take my heart with you. Simple, honest, destroying me. What's left of it anyway? It's yours. Whether you stay or go, it's yours. Before I could respond, a small voice came from inside the room. Naomi? I pulled away from the Mafia boss and stepped through the doorway. David sat in the corner of his room, surrounded by the Russian storybooks I'd been reading to him, his face blotchy from crying. When he saw me, his expression crumpled. T. Prishla. You came. Da Malish. Yes, little one. I crossed the room and knelt in front of him. Ya Zeus. I'm here. He threw himself into my arms and I held him while he sobbed against my shoulder, whispering in Russian that he'd thought I'd left forever, that everyone leaves, that he couldn't lose me too. Each word was a knife to my heart. David, poslushai menya. David, listen to me. I pulled back gently, wiping his tears. Mne нужно поговорить. С тобой о чем-то важном. I need to talk to you about something important. His blue eyes, so like his father's, went wide with fear. Ti ukodish. You're leaving. God, this child was too perceptive. The word stuck in my throat. I looked back toward the doorway where the Mafia boss stood watching us, his expression carefully blank, but his hands clenched into fists at his sides. This was my moment. My choice. Leave now and save myself from a world of violence and danger, or stay and become part of something that could destroy me. David's small hand touched my cheek. Pojaluista ne ukodhi? Please don't go. Ya tebya lublyu. I love you. Something inside me shattered. All the fear, all the rational arguments, all the very logical reasons I should walk away. They dissolved in the face of this child's desperate plea. Because the truth was, I loved him too. Loved his resilience, his gentle spirit, the way he was learning to heal. Loved the trust he'd placed in me when trust had been stolen from him so violently. And his father. I looked at the Mafia boss again, really looked at him. Saw past the danger and the darkness to the man who'd trusted me with his greatest treasure. Who'd been vulnerable with me when vulnerability could get him killed. Who'd offered to let me go even though it would destroy him. Who'd given me a choice when his world was built on taking. Ya nikuda ne ukoju. I'm not going anywhere. The words came out steady, certain, final. I switched to English, my eyes locked on the Mafia boss. I'm staying. The change in his expression was instantaneous. Shock, disbelief, then something so raw and grateful it made my eyes burn. David didn't fully understand, but he felt the shift. Ostayosizia? Staying? Da. Ja ostayus. Yes, I'm staying. He hugged me so tightly I could barely breathe, chattering in rapid Russian about all the things we'd do together, the books we'd read, the games we'd play. Over his head, the Mafia boss mouthed 2 words: "Thank you." But I shook my head. This wasn't charity or sacrifice. This was choice. I was choosing them. Choosing this dangerous, complicated, impossible life. Choosing to become part of a family forged in tragedy and held together by fierce love. Choosing to step into the darkness because that's where they were, and I couldn't imagine being anywhere else. Later, after David had finally fallen asleep, actually peacefully asleep, the Mafia boss found me in the garden. Rain had stopped, leaving everything gleaming and fresh. He didn't say anything at first, just pulled me against him, his arms coming around me like he'd never let go. "You're sure?" he murmured against my hair. "Once you're in, Naomi, there's no stepping back out. My world doesn't work that way." "I know. You'll be watched, protected, sometimes suffocated by security." "I know. There will be danger, threats, people who'll try to use you against me." "I know, Carlo." I pulled back to look at him. "I know all of it, and I'm choosing it anyway. Choosing you. Choosing David. Choosing us." He cupped my face in his hands, his thumbs brushing away tears I hadn't realized were falling. "I will spend every day proving you made the right choice. You already have." When he kissed me, it felt like a seal, a promise, a beginning, a binding of fates that couldn't be undone. I'd stepped into his world completely now, become the Mafia boss's weakness and his strength, David's comfort and his anchor. And as we stood there in the garden, his arms around me and rain-washed air filling my lungs, I thought about how strange life was. 3 months ago, I'd been walking through a park, living my small, safe, predictable life. Then I'd heard a child crying. Then I'd whispered comfort in Russian, "Ne plach, malish." "Don't cry, little one." And that single moment, that simple act of kindness, had changed everything. It had led me here, to a mansion surrounded by guards and secrets, to a traumatized child learning to heal, to a dangerous man learning to love again, to a family I'd never expected but couldn't imagine living without. People say, you can't choose your family. But standing in the Mafia boss's arms, I knew that wasn't true. Sometimes family chooses you, and sometimes, if you're brave enough, or foolish enough, you choose them back. I'd made my choice, and I'd never look back. Ne plach, Malaish. I'd whispered to a crying child. "Don't cry, little one." I'd had no idea those words would bind me to the Mafia boss forever. But now, wrapped in his embrace with David sleeping safely upstairs, I understood something crucial. Some bindings aren't chains. They're wings. And I was finally ready to fly. If you're ready for the explosion coming in the next story, smash subscribe, hit like, and stay close for more mind-blowing and exciting stories.